Well, hello, this is Steve back again with another video in our Making Sourdough Bread series. And this time, believe it or not, we finally got here, we're actually going to make a loaf of bread. I spent a lot of time covering the issue of sourdough starter, and that's very important because that's the foundation of your baking, the foundation of your sourdough baking. And if you know how to make, look after and preserve your sourdough starter, you are off to a great start. And understanding it is more important than just following along with what someone else tells you, or just buying a starter and starting it from there. If you make it from scratch, you really have got a leg up on people that buy or are given some starter, even though most of my students have been given a starter when they did the class. But anyway, that's pretty well under our belt now. So to make a sourdough loaf, what we're going to do and what I'm going to show you step by step is how to make a basic white sourdough loaf. And the reason why I always teach a basic white sourdough loaf without putting any other flours or anything like that into it is because once you have mastered the basic loaf, just white bread flour and the other three ingredients that I'm going to go into, the most basic of sourdough bread. Once you've mastered that, you've got a foundation that you can then use to go to experiment with all different kinds of breads. Using that basic sourdough loaf, the basic white, you could, for instance, change out, say, 100 grams of the white flour and change it for wholemeal wheat flour and make a light wholemeal. You could do the same with rye. You could do the same with spelt. You could take a little bit more out and get a 3-grain bread, for instance, white flour and wholemeal and rye, or wholemeal and spelt, or whatever else. There's a whole range of grains, and we're going to go through that later on. So, but once you've got the understanding of how a white sourdough loaf feels when you mix it, how it handles when you're interacting with it, doing the folds that we're going to talk about, how it's supposed to look when you shape it, how to master the methods of shaping that we're going to show you, and how long it takes to proof and what it looks like when it proofs. Those are all things that once you've got them in your mind, in your understanding, you can then adapt those to different loaves of bread. And by doing that at least 3-4 times, I'd recommend at least 4 times, you'll have a really good understanding. And when you start handling other flours which alter the feel, particularly rye, because rye makes the dough a lot more sticky. And if you haven't mastered some of those techniques, you might struggle making a rye loaf. But once you've mastered the techniques, that's not such a big step to take. So here we are, we're going to make the loaf. The loaf that I'm actually making is for a customer for tomorrow. So I've got to do my best. And but it is a little bit larger than the standard loaf that I have in my recipes. The standard loaf is 500 grams of white flour, 320 mils of water, 80 grams of starter, and 10 grams of salt. But in this recipe, in this mix I'm going to be using bigger quantities. But if you've downloaded the notes that come with this series, if you're on the school platform, then it has the correct amounts. But I'll reference those as I go again anyway. So if you do want to make the larger loaf, then at least you know the quantities involved in doing that. Okay, so I'll reposition the camera and I'll be back just to introduce you to the ingredients, and then we'll go from there. Okay, so let's start with the ingredients that we're going to use in our sourdough loaf, our basic white sourdough loaf. The first ingredient is the flour, and I'm using today strong bread flour. Now, strong bread flour is just a term that is used to distinguish flour that's used for bread as opposed to flour that's used for normal baking, like cakes and pastries and things like that. And what makes strong bread flour strong is that it's got a higher protein content. And what that does, the higher protein content, means that it actually develops more strength so that the bread will rise better. It will hold the airiness in the bread a lot better than a plain, or what Americans call all-purpose flour, and it has a better texture when you eat it. It's just all round much better for baking bread. You can bake bread with basic all-purpose flour, but it's never quite as good. You can get away with it at a pinch, but it's never quite as good. So that's the flour that I use. And for my Australian or South Australian viewers of this video, the brand that I use is Cummins Milling brand. It's a local mill. It mills flour from local farmers. It's a family-owned business, very good quality, and I've been using it for quite a while, and it's a great flour. Okay, the next ingredient we're going to talk about is the water, and I'm using filtered water. I have a filter on my tap in the kitchen here, and I use just filtered water at room temperature. Now, at the moment in Australia, it's summer, and our temperature's averaging in the kitchen here, averaging about 23, 24. Warmer days might get to 25 because we do have air conditioning, but it might average to 25. So that's perfect temperature for the making of sourdough bread. If it's any warmer, it will increase the fermentation and make that happen a lot quicker. If it's any less than that, like if it's cooler than that, it'll slow it down. And we can talk about how you can regulate the fermentation rate of your dough by the temperature of the water and by controlling the ambient temperature. As we go along, we'll talk about that. The next ingredient is the salt. And all I'm doing today is I'm using just plain white cooking salt. I would avoid using very, very large grain salt. It won't tend to mix terribly well, particularly if you're mixing by hand. So I use a cooking salt. It's not a really fine grain, but it certainly does distribute quite well in the flour, so that's fine to use. And the last but not the least ingredient is our sourdough starter. Now, what you might notice, this starter that I have here is not really fresh and bubbly and really light the way that it can be, and I'll see if you can see this, but I'll just pull that aside there. Well, it hasn't got a lot of that internal bubbliness that you might find with a fresh, well-fed sourdough starter. Now that might shock you, because in most videos that I've seen on sourdough, they always stress, feed your starter just before you're going to need it, and so that you're using it at its peak. Now I fed this, not last night, the night before, and it's reached its peak, and now it's gone a little bit dormant, but it's still well within the window of 3 or 4 days that you can use a sourdough starter and still get an excellent result. That's gone a little bit dormant, the airiness has gone out of it, but it's hungry, it's looking for food. As soon as we mix it in with the dough, it's going to start the fermentation process, and it'll be absolutely fine. And also, I like to have a little bit of tang in my sourdough, and using a slightly older starter, it does develop a little bit more of a tang, that sour taste that sourdough bread's known for. So don't be too fussed if you haven't got an absolutely fresh starter. I wouldn't use a starter that's more than 5 days old, really, because it will take quite a lot longer to ferment, and it will get quite acidic. So, 2-3 days is about the maximum that you'd want to go for. So there you have it. Flour, strong bread flour. We're going to use 600 grams in this particular recipe. 600 grams for the larger loaf I'm making. The standard loaf is 500 grams. We're going to use 390 grams of water. In the standard loaf, it's 320. And we're going to use 12 grams of salt instead of the 10 grams that we would normally use. And we're going to use 100 grams of starter compared to the 80 grams that I would use in a normal loaf. Now, the hydration rate, I won't go into that in a lot of detail now, but the hydration rate, that is the percentage of water as opposed to the amount of flour, is going to be roughly 68%, 69% hydration rate. And what that means is it's going to be a fairly moist loaf. It's a reasonably wet dough. It's wetter, for instance, than what you would get if you were making a yeasted bread, but it's it's in that really ideal range when it comes to sourdough. So I'm going to reposition the camera again. I'm going to bring my mixer onto this part of the bench, and I'm actually going to use a stand mixer for this recipe. And the reason is because nearly everybody that comes to my classes these days has actually got a stand mixer. And using a stand mixer it makes it very easy to make sourdough bread, but I will talk about how to do it manually if you don't have a mixer, or if you want to learn how to make sourdough without using a mixer. Okay, so I'll see you in just a moment. Okay, so here we are. We've got our stand mixer. In this case, it's a Kenwood Titanium Chef Baker XL. It's a larger than normal mixer, but it's a nice one. I really like it, and it will make large batches of dough. But yours might not be that big. It doesn't really matter. And one of the features that I like about this particular mixer is that it has a built-in scale. So I can measure straight into the bowl rather than measuring and then pouring it into the bowl. But what I would normally suggest is that you use a bowl to mix your dough in. If you're mixing by hand, you'd have a bowl, preferably stainless steel or glass, and you would measure on the scale. You would set your scale to 0 with the bowl on it, and you would then add your ingredients and reset the scale to 0 after each addition of an ingredient. In this case, I can do that quite easily with this mixer, and it just makes life easy for me. Okay, so I am going to actually set this to 0 because at the moment it's showing 3 grams and there's nothing on there. So I must have either touched it or something when I first turned it on. So I'm going to reset that to 0, and that is at 0 now. Now, the first thing we're going to add is our sourdough starter. And as I said, we're going to use 100 grams of sourdough starter. So I'm going to measure that into the bowl. Now I have only quite a small amount of sourdough starter here. I don't keep a lot of sourdough starter these days. The only time I ever have a lot of sourdough starter is when I'm running a class and I've got to make a large batch for students. But I only need a tiny bit once I've taken this out. I've got 80 grams in there now, and I'll actually end up using nearly all of this. But that doesn't faze me at all, because I only need the slightest little bit of sourdough starter in there after I've taken out the batch that I need. And it's becoming a little bit cantankerous here. Okay. Right, so that's about 100 grams there. All right, and that's all I have left in there, but that's more than enough to mix some new flour and water with and get a new batch of sourdough starter. So don't get into the habit of keeping a huge amount of starter, because if the more of a batch of starter that you keep, the more acid that it will get, and after a while it will get a little bit sluggish because of the build-up of acid. That will be really nice and lively and bubbly when I've fed that, and it comes back to its former glory. Okay, so that's the starter in there. What we're going to do now is add the water. So I'm going to reset this to 0, and I'm going to put 100 grams or 100 mils. I'm just going to mix that sourdough starter in with that water. Now, actually, I did that wrong. Oh, no. I've still got that scale set, and I've just measured 100 grams in, not thinking. It's me doing my video. Sometimes I lose track. I'm going to put another 290 grams in to make it up to 390 grams. 385. 393. So I'll just take a tiny bit out. Here we are, 390 exactly. My apologies for that. Sometimes when I'm trying to think about what I'm saying and do it as well, I lose track of where I am. So, but I'm not going to edit this out. You'll do the same things when you make your own bread, so it's good practice. Okay, so now we've got the starter and the water in there. I like to mix the starter in so that it immediately will absorb evenly, pretty evenly in the flour when we put it in. Next step is I'm going to put the flour in. Now in this case, I need 600 grams of flour. Normally you would put 500 grams in, and I'm just going to measure that in with a cup. It's 197, 339, 469, 530, 560, 578, 590, 596, 599, 600 grams exactly of flour. And I'm going to add the salt, 12 grams of salt. Now, when you're using a stand mixer, because the mixing action of the machine, the spiral dough hook in my case, is so efficient at mixing the dough, you can actually delay putting the salt in for a little while. You can mix the dough, let it rest for about 10 minutes, then put the salt in, for instance, and that will just give it a little bit of time for the dough to develop before you put the salt in. But I'm not going to do that. I'm going to put the salt in right at the beginning because it doesn't really make that much difference. There's some people that think that it makes, or suggest that it makes a huge difference not to put the salt in at first when you mix with your dough, but I've found that the difference is very negligible, and if you do everything else right, that from this point onwards, I can't tell the difference, to be honest with you. So I'm going to put the salt in right at the beginning again, and that is set to 0 again, and I need 12 grams. So I'm just going to sprinkle that. 10, 11, 12. There we go. So that's all my ingredients in there. And so I'm going to put the hook on, the spiral hook. You may have a different shaped dough hook than this, whether it's a C-shaped hook, what they call a C-shaped hook, or a spiral hook, it doesn't really matter. Your machine will be designed for mixing bread, and if you're not sure which one to use, which attachment to use, consult the manual for your machine. All manufacturers spend a lot of time doing the research to make sure that they've got the right designs for the type of machine that it is. And I have another Kenwood machine, and that has a C-shaped hook, and that works just fine. Okay, but the spiral hook is better for larger batches when I have them. Okay, so I'm just going to pop that in there, and I'm going to turn that on. I'm just going to turn that on to a minimum speed, just to fold that in initially. And hopefully you can see the dough mixing. And why we only use a very slow speed initially is because we're not trying to do a lot with the dough, we're just trying to incorporate it. If you turn it up to too high a speed, you'll have flour everywhere, and it'll throw flour up onto the sides of the bowl, and that won't get picked up and all that sort of thing. So all I'm doing is letting the machine just slowly incorporate it. This might be whatever the lowest speed is on your machine. On a KitchenAid, it'll be speed 1. On other machines, they might have a folding setting, or as this one does, and this will be just fine. So you can see that already that dough is pretty well incorporated, and it's only been a few seconds, probably 20-30 seconds. Okay, I'm going to stop that now. And I'm just going to show you what the dough looks like. Okay, and you'll notice that it's really got no strength at all when you first mix it. it's just a dough. It doesn't really have any bread strength or suppleness or stretchiness. It's just flour and a couple of ingredients just mixed together, and it's just a sticky dough. Now, if you are mixing by hand, then that's the stage that you want to get it to. So you mix it by hand, fold it in, and you don't have to have a science degree to know how to mix flour and water together. Just try not to get too much dough all over your hands. Use only one hand to mix with, and pick up the dough along the sides of the bowl as you go. But when you've got it mixed to that sort of appearance, that sort of consistency, so that all the dough is all the water is incorporated, and it's at a what we call shaggy mass, not a shaggy mess, shaggy mass stage. That's when you can leave it, when you do it by hand. But being a machine, this has got another advantage, and that is that I can now take that dough, I can actually mix it further and mix it with the machine until it is a nice, smooth and supple dough. So this is where the two techniques differ. If I was mixing by hand, I would just cover that now and let it rest for an hour. But seeing as I've got the machine, and it's not hard to do, I'm going to mix that. I'm going to mix that for a good probably 6 minutes until it starts to show signs of it being elastic, smooth, and pulling away from the sides of the bowl. Okay, so you won't have to watch all of this. I'll come back and we'll revisit it when we're getting to that point. I'm going to reset this to a slightly higher speed. This is on speed 1 on my Kenwood, and I'll see you when we're at that point. Okay, so here we are. We're well into the mixing process. It's actually just gone over 6 minutes, but you can see, can't you, how that dough is now looking a lot different. It's much more stretchy. You can see it pulling away from the side of the bowl. You can just see that the dough is behaving a lot differently to what it was when it was first mixed. Now, this takes the place of kneading your dough. You don't need it. You don't need sourdough normally, but this process actually does really help, and I'll explain that a little bit later. But it means that I need to do less work with the dough in the way of stretches and folds and things like that. But I will do them because I want to show you how it's done. But when you're mixing by mixer, you can just let it go. I've actually gone over now. It's 7 minutes and 20 seconds. Still got a little bit more that it can go. For some reason, the freshness of the flour, or which batch of flour it is, even if you use the same brand, it often behaves a little bit differently when you mix the dough. So don't be so tied to specific times. It's now 7 minutes and 45 seconds, but that's looking pretty good. I think that that's ready to go. So I'll turn that off now. Okay, so you can see that that dough is a lot different to what it was when I first started mixing it. And I'll grab a bit of the dough, and you can see that it's actually a lot more stretchy and has more consistency to it. I'm just going to clean that dough hook off, remove the dough hook, and do a little bit of a test. It's called a window pane test. I hope you can see it with the camera the way it is. But that isn't fully developed yet, but it's nicely developed from what it was when we first started. That's quite a nice smooth dough now. So normally I would just leave it in the bowl like that and come back to it later. But I find that sometimes using that large bowl with that small amount of dough, it's a little bit hard to work with from here. So I'm actually going to transfer that bowl, that dough, into a different bowl. Okay, so I've just wet my hand a little bit and I'm going to just ease that out of the bowl like this. You can use a bench scraper to do this, but if you wet your hand, it actually is quite easy to handle. We're going to just pop that in there like that. Get as much out as we can. And that is a nice looking dough. It's only been mixing for, as I said, 7 minutes or so, but that's looking a very nice looking dough. And all I'm going to do now is cover it, and we're going to leave that to sit for an hour. So we'll cover it with one of these. This is just a disposable shower cap, which I use a lot. I sell them as well because they're really, really very handy for this. And what we're going to do now is just leave it. Now, if you mixed by hand, you do exactly the same thing. You'd mix it until it's a shaggy mass, as we talked about. You want to mix it until it's not got any dry bits or bits of flour stuck to the bottom of the bowl, because otherwise you'll end up, it just deteriorates the quality of the loaf. You want to make sure you mix it well, and try to get it so that once you've mixed it, it's looking like it's a proper dough and not just a kind of half mixed bowl of flour and water and whatever. But there you go, you just leave that there. And what that's going to do is that's going to start to immediately begin to ferment. There's going to be a few things that are happening while this is just sitting here resting. The first thing is that the sourdough starter is going to wake up. It's going to be in contact with a fresh lot of food. There's a starch in the flour, and those spores and microbes, the sourdough starter microbial mix is going to wake up, and they're going to start feeding on that flour. So it's the fermentation process. They're going to begin that. And also what's going to happen is that the flour and the water are going to blend. The flour is going to absorb the water. In fact, a lot of people don't realise, but it can take quite a while for flour to properly and fully absorb the water. It can take a minimum of 30 minutes and about an hour before that wetting out process of the flour is complete, particularly with a high protein flour like we're using. So there you go. That's what you do, and I'll meet you back when it's had that hour to rest, and I'll show you the next stage. Okay, so while we're waiting, I just thought I'd talk about something which it can be a very important point, and that is that when you're resting your dough, or when we get to what we call the bulk fermentation stage of your bread dough, it's important to, as I said, to regulate the temperature. And the temperature should, for ideal fermentation, should be somewhere in, I'm talking Celsius now, should be somewhere between sort of 24, 25 degrees up to about 30 degrees. And that's because at those sort of temperatures, it gives the bacteria and the starches enough warmth that they reach maximum activity, and they're actually doing their job of digesting and converting that starch into all the goodies that make a really good sourdough bread. They're doing that at a maximum rate of speed without suffering. For instance, if it gets too hot, they'll start to die. If it gets particularly over 40 degrees, they start to die. And if it gets too low, it can take for a long, long time to do your fermentation. There are charts available on the internet that show that, for instance, at 18 degrees Celsius, it can take 7 or 8 hours for your dough to get to the point where it's ready to shape and put into the basket or in the fridge. Whereas at that sort of 25, 26 degrees, it takes about 3 to 4 hours for that dough to do the same job. So it can make quite a bit of difference. So what you see here, this is something that I've only just bought recently. I bought this online. I am thinking about selling them, particularly in my classes. but I won't be able to sell them at the cheapest that you can buy them for on the internet because I don't have that sort of buying power. But for convenience sake, I'll make them available to students in my classes. But this is a great little tool. You buy them online, you can buy it on Amazon, and it's actually made in China, of course, and it actually has an insulated box. So you can see my dough in there. It's sitting in here. I've got a little rack in the bottom. It doesn't come with that, but I have got a little rack in the bottom so that the bowl sits up from the base. It's got a heating element in the bottom, and this is obviously insulated, so I could put that loaf, that dough in here. It zips up, and it's large enough I can actually put 2 loaves in there if I use a slightly smaller bowl. And as you can see here, hopefully you can see, but it's actually showing you the temperature. I'll bring that more into focus. Hopefully you can see it. It's showing you the temperature, and in this case it's showing it's 82 degrees Fahrenheit, and it's got a timer set to 8 hours. Now, I won't be putting it in there for 8 hours, but you can set that to whatever time you want, from 1 hour through to 24 hours. And you can actually regulate the temperature and the time, so you can actually get a perfectly proofed dough by doing that. So that's just one option. If it's cold weather, you could use the oven with a light on. That works quite well in a lot of ovens. Some ovens have got a proofing setting that you can actually set it to. Normally it's about 40 degrees, I find, but sometimes they're a little bit lower than that, which would be good. 40 degrees is a bit high, so you wouldn't want to leave it fermenting at 40 degrees for too long, because, as I said, the starter in the dough can actually start to be affected by that high temperature. But it won't get to 40 degrees straight away. So you could put it in there for an hour and then take it out or turn it off, and it'll gradually cool down and it'll maintain a good temperature. So whatever you do, it could be a seed raising mat. I've used those for years. The electric seed raising mats that you can buy online, I've used those. I've used a microwave with a cup of freshly boiled, or a jar of freshly boiled water in there to keep it warm. Whatever you need to do when it's cold to get that dough within that range. And then, of course, too, and I'll just grab it, to check that the dough is actually fermenting at the right temperature, I like to use these. This is a probe thermometer, and I would just check that dough. In fact, for the sake of the exercise, I'll actually do that now. So if I pop that in there, don't know if you can see that, but that's actually showing 24.9 degrees Celsius. So it's just right in that sweet spot as far as fermentation temperatures go. So there you go. That's just a little bit of a discussion around dough temperature and time and how it relates. You can see there's a little probe here, and that just measures the temperature and regulates the thermostat. So there you go. That's a little proofing box. You can buy very expensive ones, fold down plastic ones that have got much more controls over it than this has, but I found that this thing works really, really well. Okay, so here we are. It's been an hour now since we put this in the bowl here and just let it rest. Now, I'm actually making this video in the evening, and I noticed that during this hour that we've left it, the temperature has actually dropped in the kitchen a bit. So I did actually put this in the proofer for about half an hour before it got too cold. So I'm just going to check the temperature now and just see what the temperature of the dough is. So let's remove the cover. We'll have a look at the dough. It doesn't look that much different, what I'm noticing is it's a little bit more of a glossy finish. A little bit of moisture has been developed, and that's quite normal during the fermentation process because the yeasts and bacteria do produce a little bit of moisture. And I'm going to also do a window pane test to see how it's going. I'll just wet my hands a little bit, and I'm going to pick that dough up and just test that out and see how it's going. Oh, that's really looking good. See how far that spreads out? And it does tear a little bit on the side there, but that's looking really good. That's just spreading out into a nice window pane. And that's because when we mix the dough initially, that 6 minutes or 7 minutes of mixing, that did a lot of the work for us as far as developing that gluten. So we really only need to do, I'm going to show you a technique now, stretching and folding. We really only need to do one of these, but I'll actually show you the process, and we actually do it. If you mix it by hand, then you need to do this 3 times, maybe even 4 times to develop the dough and get it to the point where it's nice and stretchy and will produce a window pane like we did just now. So I'll get my hands a little bit damp again. And I'm going to show you the stretch and fold. Now, this is just something that we do to help to develop the strength of the dough, the structure of the dough, develop the gluten to make the gluten strands and little individual molecules of the gluten join up and form into strands that are very stretchy and also will laminate and overfold each other so that they hold in the gases, which is what we want when as that loaf is proving. But we have a look at the dough. It's not really done a lot. It might have expanded just a little bit. It's not terribly obvious. It probably has expanded a little bit, but it's pretty much as we left it, other than it's looking a little bit glossy. It's not really all that wobbly, although we do have a little bit of a wobble there, if you can see that in the video. But I'll just show you the stretch and fold. Now, this is just a very simple process. It's not hard to do, and all I'm doing is loosening the dough off. Actually, I might get a bowl or something and put some water in, because I might need to check this a couple of times. So I'm just going to dampen my hand. I'm only going to use one hand for this. Some people use 2, but I'm only going to use one hand. I'm going to just loosen that from around the sides of the bowl. And I'll shake off the water because I don't want to introduce too much more moisture into the dough. And then I'm going to lift that lift that dough and pop it over. So hence the stretch and fold. A little bit more. Work my way right underneath the dough and lift it up. Stretch and fold. Stretch and fold. Now the dough is actually quite moist. It's a fairly wet dough, but because we've developed that gluten structure in that dough already with the mixing, it isn't sticky. It's not actually sticking to my hands much at all. A little bit, but not much. And so I'm just going to continue to work around the dough until I sense that it's offering me a little bit of resistance. There you go. See that bubble there? There's a bubble emerging. That's a good sign. It shows that the fermentation is progressing nicely. We're going to look for more of those bubbles as we go along. And I think that's about right. Clean up the sides of the bowl, and we're going to leave that to, now, as I say, if you were mixing the dough by hand, you would need to do this probably 3 times, but because we mix the dough by machine, we've developed the gluten and the structure in the dough already. Now we could just leave it and let it ferment. But normally, if you mix it by hand, or if you have mixed it but you've quickly mixed it and haven't done it for an extended period, you'd need to do this at least 3 times. You let it rest for the initial hour, and then 30 minutes, and then you do your first stretch and fold, leave it for 30 minutes, another stretch and fold, and then leave it for another 30 minutes and another stretch and fold. And that's 3 sets of stretching and folding. Then you do another window pane test. And if the window pane hasn't properly formed, like it has here, then you might want to do a 4th one. But this dough is going to progress quite well. Now I'm going to test this temperature again. Now, because I did actually put it in the proofer for a while because the kitchen was getting cooler, that dough is actually now 28 degrees Celsius. So I've just lifted it a few degrees just by putting it in there for that, for about half an hour I put it in there for. So that's coming along really nicely. And as I said, there's the evidence that you've got a bubble coming up there. I've seen some other ones, and that will progress really nicely. So all going well. So that's how you stretch and fold the dough, and how you develop the gluten structure in the dough. It takes a little bit of practice to get it looking nice and neat like that. When you first start doing it, you tend to get dough all over you and get sticky. You'll get used to all that. You just do it often enough. You get some practice, and you'll eventually learn how to tame the dough, show it who's boss, and you'll be fine. But I'm just going to leave that now. I'm not going to be doing any more stretching and folding to that dough. It's got all the structure and the temperature and everything is right. I'm just going to let that ferment for until I see definite signs of quite a bit of activity, more bubbles, and some expansion. I'm going to let it expand to about 60% more than what it was when we first mixed it. So I'll see you again when we're ready to go to the next stage. Okay, so we're back again. Now I've let this just continue to proof, and I've rested it up for about almost an hour without touching it any further from what I did before with the stretch and fold. And it's risen now, I would say it was about 60% more than what it was. That can be a little bit, I mean, when you first start, it can be a little bit difficult to tell exactly how much it's risen. Some people actually like to use a straight-sided container to place the dough in, and they can actually put a rubber band around where it was, press it out to level and let it rise. That's all fine, but I find that if you're needing to do stretches and folds, it's not so easy in one of those containers. So I much prefer a bowl, and I've just learned over time to estimate pretty well how much it's risen. There are, I don't know whether you can see it from the camera, but there are about 3 or 4 decent sized bubbles, and there's others coming up. There's one coming up here, there's one just here, there's one just there, there's another one there. It's actually coming along really, really well. So now it's ready to shape. There are some tests that you can do to tell whether it's ready to go to the next stage, and there are 4 main tests. One is that it's risen in volume. So that's number 1. The number 2 is that there are some bubbles showing. They can be bubbles, big bubbles coming up from inside. They can also be blistery type bubbles on the surface, or both. It's not a perfect test, that one, because some doughs don't actually show bubbles much at all. Rye bread, for instance, rye doesn't tend to do that, so it's not a perfect test. The other one is that it's wobbly. You'll notice there it's quite wobbly now. It's like jelly, and it's quite good. That's a fairly good test. And the other one is that you get that moist looking effect on the top, on the surface, and that's not really all that noticeable, but it is definitely there. So the main one is the volume difference, and the other one is that sort of bubbliness and wobbliness that you can see. Okay, so now we're going to transfer that dough into this banneton here. Now, why have I got that shaped banneton? I've got that shaped banneton because the vessel that I bake in is a long oval shaped vessel. In fact, why don't I get that for you and I'll show you. Just move that to the side. Okay, move those out. This is the container that I'm going to be baking in. It's a terracotta baker, well used, but it's in really good condition. And I use a liner there because, not because my dough sticks, I just find that it just makes it easy and I don't want it to stick. This is a Teflon sheet which I've cut some little V's in there and so on, so that it just fits nicely in there. And so we're going to put the dough into this vessel here. Going to let that proof up even further slowly overnight in the fridge, and then when we're ready to bake it in the morning, I'm going to transfer it into that container and we're going to bake it in that. So you need to think about how you're going to be baking your bread. If you're going to be baking it in a round Dutch oven, for instance, you'll need to have a round banneton. If you're going to bake it in a bread tin, it's different again, because you can just shape it and put it straight in the bread tin. In fact, I know that it might be mean for a little bit of a sort of messy video, but I'd rather show you than not. Okay, so if we have a bread tin like that, you'll notice that that's a similar kind of shape. We can shape it in the same way to go in a bread tin as what we do in this banneton here. If we have a round banneton, we shape it a little bit differently. Okay, so, but in this case, I'm going to use that oval shaped banneton, and I'm going to get some flour, just a little bit of flour, and that'll help me with the shaping. Okay, so how are we going to get it from there into there and in the right shape? So one thing we can do, when I work myself with my dough, I don't use anything. I've learned how to handle the dough without it being too sticky, but I find that beginners, when you first start working with sourdough, because it is a bit more of a sticky dough than you'd find if you were using yeast, for instance, it doesn't hurt to use a little bit of flour to just help with that not being quite so sticky. So a little flour here. I'm just going to get a pinch of flour. I'm just going to throw it around the edge of the dough. Right, not much on the surface, just a little bit around the edge of the dough, and I'm going to just give a little dusting on the surface. Okay, so don't use any more than that. You just use a bare minimum, and it's better to not use any at all, but for the sake of fairly new bakers, this is what I do for you. So, and then what you find is when you start to loosen that dough from the sides of that bowl, that flour just helps it to stop sticking. Okay, so you can see that's nice and round, and it's ready to come away. Turn that over and that'll just drop out. You might need to just help it out a little bit. Okay, and there we are. I'm not going to put any flour on the surface of that dough on the top, because I want that to remain fairly sticky. I've got a little something in there, I don't know what that is. Just a bit of something. But anyway, so what we're going to do now is I'm going to just use the bench scraper to form this dough into that oval shape. So I'm going to sort of spread the dough out, looking like that, and just using the bench scraper plus a little bit of flour on the bottom, it will release. So stretch that out, fold that over, a bit over halfway. See those bubbles there? Really nice dough. Same thing again here. And once again, you might find that you have to learn how to do this. Fold that over like that, and then I'm going to release that dough again. Whoop, there we go. That doesn't really matter. I just want to line it up to show you the process, and I'm just going to roll that dough like that. Now, on the subject of shaping, you get people with all kinds of fancy shaping techniques, and that's all very well, but I find that most people, when they're first starting out, they need a very simple process. That's fairly simple. 1, 2, turn it round and roll. And if you need to put some flour on your hands to turn that dough around, you can do that. Okay, so that's the first stage, and then I might just dust that tiny bit around the edges as well, because I need to then round that up a little bit, what we call just shape it. Just push it in underneath. Just push it in. And that's looking pretty good. Then I'm going to get some rice flour. And rice flour is really good because it's just non-stick. It's sort of like powdered Teflon. It just doesn't stick. You'll notice that in this banneton I've got this non-woven hairnet. It's a disposable hairnet. I give students one of those in my classes, plus I sell them in packs. You can buy them online, just they're non-woven, and they're really good. It means that your banneton will stay very clean, and because you need a liner, otherwise you've got to put lots of flour in it. And also these are not sticky, so that sometimes you get the cloth ones that come in bannetons. Those need a lot of flour. You need to really put a lot of flour on them, particularly when they're new, so that, that it doesn't stick to the dough. Otherwise it will definitely stick. But I find with these you can use a minimum of flour, just a dusting. Okay, just a dusting of flour. Where's my scraper? There it is. Turn that up and into there. That's it. And you can do a stitch if you like. This is a process to just help develop the strength of the crust. So you can just pull it up from either side like that, cross it over, and that just tightens the dough, tightens the skin of the dough, which becomes the crust. Okay, that's that there. Once again, a bit more of a dusting so that nothing sticks. And then I just loosen that cover, that liner rather, so that that won't stick to the cover. And where's my, what did I do? Oh, there it is. I'll put it over there. And I use the same cover that I used for the bowl. That's like that. Now, just before I do though, let me just inspect the dough in the banneton. Now, you'll find that that is about, this particular banneton is right for this size of dough. Sometimes you need to be, well, you need to be careful that you don't get a banneton too big or too small for the dough. And it takes a little bit of experience. So I'm available if you want to sort of sort out what type of banneton you want. You can just send me a message just asking, look, I'm using this amount of flour, this recipe, what size banneton would I need? I can usually help you work it out. But that's about right for this size of dough. Just look at that bouncy, lovely bouncy dough. It's like marshmallow. That's exactly what we want. But that's going to rise a little bit further. I won't bake this until it's about got the top of the dough is about even with the top of the banneton. So I'm going to put it in the fridge, let it cool right down. It'll slowly ferment overnight. But when I take it out in the morning, I want to see that dough risen a bit. In fact, I might leave it out a little bit more even to let it come up again a bit before I put it in the fridge. But that's looking really good. Okay, so anyway, that's what we do. Pop that cover. The liner becomes the cover as well, in a sense. We put the liner on, and that's nicely just covered and ready to. It'll retain the moisture as it slowly proofs overnight. So I will see you in the morning when I'm ready to start to bake this, and I'll show you how to go to the next stage and how to bake it. I hope this has been helpful. If you have any questions, please send me a message clarifying anything. If you think I've made any errors, that's not impossible. Trying to do this while you're talking and thinking of how the video is going to go is not as easy as it looks. But anyway, I think we've got there. We certainly have gotten there with the dough, and hopefully you've enjoyed this and you've learnt something. So I'll see you in the morning.